Germany. All right, so the lesson that we're going to discuss for this subject is critical thinking, reading, and writing. Okay, lesson objectives. At the end of the lesson, the students will be able to state the nature and purpose of critics and reaction papers, articulate the value of critical thinking, reading, and writing, and provide examples of personal experiences that required the use of critical thinking. Right. So quick question. I want to ask this question to you guys. Okay. When you post, comment, or share something in your social media account, okay, for example, on Facebook, do you think first what would be the possible response or reaction of your social media friends before you do it? Okay, for example, when you post or you comment or you share something in your Facebook account, do you think first what will be the reaction or response of your friends, your social media friends, before you share it or before you comment or post? Okay, let me ask Reniel.
Yes, sir. Mag-isip nyo po bago mag-post of something, sir.
Again, Reniel.
Ah, yes, sir. Gina-think yun ako on sa possible response ng mga friends sa Facebook, sir, before ko mag-post something.
Why?
Kasi, one day, sir, kanang mahalaan pa lang tag-retarded ta or unsa ba na, sir.
That's why we have our own reasons why we are cautious when it comes to posting or acting as a whole when it comes to social media. So even sometimes I'm really mindful of what I'll be sharing or commenting or posting in social media because not all people will agree to my personal perspectives or something that I'm going to share in social media. So there's a relevance why I ask you this question. Since in this age of internet and technology, it's very easy for us to get information, to search for information because internet is accessible na. But we need to be careful when choosing information that we want to consume. That's why we need critical thinking. Okay, critical thinking is an evaluative thinking. To evaluate means to carefully weigh any idea, action, decision, or a piece of work, like a painting or a research paper, to consider its merits or demerits. Thus, to criticize and to evaluate both mean to judge. Judgments contrary to popular belief can be both positive and negative. So when we say critical thinking, it involves evaluation, examination. You need to properly scrutinize information that you want to consume or you want to read for yourself, or anything that can be a subject for criticism. It could be a piece of work, yung books, arts, research paper, or anything. In critical thinking, you also have to consider its advantages and disadvantages. What are the positive sides and what are the negative sides? Hence, when you criticize, you're going to formulate judgment. It doesn't necessarily mean that when you criticize something or when you provide criticism, you are very judgmental in a negative way. When you say judgment, it could be positive or negative. It's not negative all the time. Kasi we hear from other people like, you're so judgmental. It doesn't necessarily mean being judgmental is negative. You are just being critical. Critical thinking refers to the ability to analyze information objectively and make a reasoned judgment. It involves the evaluation of sources such as data, facts, observable phenomena, and research findings. So there are many things that be considered or can be subjected to criticism. You see, critical thinking, when you criticize, you need to analyze, you need to evaluate, you need to scrutinize, but in an objective manner, meaning you should have a basis, you should have a criteria when you criticize something. It's not just about your personal opinion, it's not just about your personal belief, your biases, but you have a criteria to follow when you criticize something. Good critical thinkers can draw reasonable conclusions from a set of information and discriminate between useful and less useful details to solve problems or make decisions. Okay, if you know how to critically think, it means you know how to pinpoint or identify or determine which information are useful or not. Meaning, in criticizing something, you need to identify which are the major ideas, which are the main points that is useful to consider. Okay. In the field of profession or employment, employers value critical thinking skills. Why is that? Okay, employers want job candidates who can evaluate a situation using logical thought and offer the best solution. Okay, critical thinking skills are not just necessary in the academe, but it's also important in the field of professionals. Someone with critical thinking skills can be trusted to make decisions independently and will not need constant holding, which means that if you are an employer, you want your employees to be yung minimal supervision na lang. You want to trust your employees to do their job without a thorough supervision. Meaning, you have to trust them on making their job on their own most of the time. Minimal assistance. So that's why employers wanted to hire or employ people that can be trusted to do their own job, to make things by their own or with minimal supervision. So it's very important that you know how to be critical in various situations. Critical thinking abilities are among the most sought after skills in almost every industry and workplace. You can demonstrate critical thinking by using related keywords in your resume and cover letter and during your interview. So it's very important that you need to present yourself with an ability who can be trusted by your employers. So, and critical thinking abilities are among the most sought after skills. It's very important that you need to develop this kind of ability. Okay. Examples of critical thinking. The circumstances that demand critical thinking vary from industry to industry. Okay, some examples include, so which means that in every context, you have in every context or every industry, there's specific ways in order to perform your critical thinking skills or to show your critical thinking skills. For example, an attorney reviews evidence and devises a strategy to win a case or to decide whether to settle out of court. This kind of situation, critical thinking abilities are very necessary. When you want to strategize on how to win a case, are you familiar with the TV series na How to Get Away with Murder? Yung series ng Gabi. It will challenge your critical thinking skills talaga, yung How to Get Away with Murder na series. That's an example of a situation wherein you can be challenged cognitively. Next one, a manager analyzes customer feedback forms and uses this information to develop a customer service training session for employees. So based on the feedback from the customers, you can employ or you can improve the services that you're offering to your customer. So you need to be critical on choosing the information that you have gathered. Okay, aside from critical thinking, we also have critical reading, which is closely related with this kind of ability. A close relative of critical thinking is critical reading. To read critically means to apply critical thinking skills upon the things that we read, which includes many types of materials, since much of what we need for daily activities we get through reading, from the mundane like cafeteria menu to the critically life-saving like the correct dosage for medicine. Okay, this is one of the biggest issue in Philippine literacy or critical reading skills. Kasi I attended with my previous students a seminar in USEP yata yun. I think last year ba yun? Yeah, I think it's last year with my students. Yung Philippines was at the bottom in Southeast Asia, among the Southeast Asian countries with poor literacy skills. Nasa baba tayo, and it's very sad. And kinumpare yung level natin sa Singapore. I think 2 years yung ahead ng Singapore, 2 years behind tayo sa kanila. That's really a big challenge for us, for teachers, for students, to develop critical reading skills, mga literacy skills natin. Okay. So when you read, it's not just you're going to understand the meaning of the words, but you need to understand the whole context. What's the message that the author wants to convey to the readers? What's the underlying message? What are the connotations, the figurative meanings? You need to understand these underlying messages when you critically read. Okay, to read critically means to extract information actively from a text rather than taking the author's own statements as the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. In some cases, it can mean doubting the factual accuracy of the author's statements. More commonly, it means asking what we can learn from the way the author selected and arranged facts the way she did. So it's very important when you read, you need to criticize or scrutinize the text that we are reading. Not just the intention of the author, because sometimes the author's motive is biased towards his or her own belief or stand with regard to certain issues. That's why we need to extract information from the text itself, not just the author's perspective. But it's also very important to know what are the motives of the author in order to fully understand the context or the background of the text. But the thing is, because sometimes authors can be biased depending on how they frame their statements or the contents of their text. That's why we need to extract information from the text itself. Right, how to read critically. Challenge the source's credibility, which means that the most critical or critical readings will show that a source says something that is factually inaccurate or logically incoherent. Historians sometimes do so to hold historical figures to account for their misdeeds. In other cases, the goal is not to condemn the creator of the source, but to use the inaccuracies or fallacies to understand better that person's view of the world, right? When we say challenge the source's credibility, it's not just we're going to read or understand the opinion of the author or of the source of the text, but we need to look at the evidence that is being presented by the author in order to support his or her claims. So it's very important when an author presents an opinion or analysis of something, you need to look for the evidence. Why the author come up with that kind of analysis or understanding. Okay, for example, please read this one, Lilibeth. No response. How about Whimsy?
Kefauver's report downplayed juvenile delinquency as a general concept and instead dwelled specifically on sex crimes. A very large percentage of the pornography market reaches the hands of juveniles. The report claimed and the impulses which spur people to sex crimes unquestionably and are intensified by reading and seeing pornographic materials. Once again, as with the comics, an absolute lack of evidence confronted Kefauver in the efforts to establish the pornography sex crime connection. This time, instead of grappling with the obstacle in the text of his report, he banished it to the margins, a brief note buried in the report's bibliography. Presented in smaller print type than the report's body observed, there are no studies of the relationship of pornographic literature to sexual offense.
This is an example of a text wherein author claims something about the connection between pornographic literature and sexual offense. But the problem is the author did not present an evidence or something like a research study that can support his or claim. You need to scrutinize the information being presented on the text. Example, what is the source saying? That pornography spurs sex crimes and that there is no evidence to show that pornography spurs sex crimes. What is the source doing? Claiming that pornography spurs sex crimes despite the lack of evidence. And the implication of the text is that internal evidence shows that a source is lying. So why did you say that the source is lying? It's because of the poor presentation of evidence that can support the stance of the author. So that's one way on how to criticize a text or information. You need to look at the evidence presented by the author before believing his or her stand with regard to that issue. Excuse me. Next one is explain the nuances of argument. Even sources that are factually accurate and logically sound are worthy of exploration. For every person must make choices when presenting information or argument. Look for the following and use them to understand the source's creator's views. Right. So this is a very subtle technique when it comes to presenting a text, the information inside the text, because sometimes the author provided evidences in order to support his or her claim, in order to solidify the argument. But the problem is the author can be biased when it comes to choosing the evidence that he or she will present the text. That's what we call in journalism, it's what we call cherry picking. So cherry picking, you just need to get a part of a whole statement in order to frame what's your bias or what's your personal stand, and which is not related or not the whole meaning being presented by the original source. Okay, example, please read this one. Anjali.
The films, like the magazines, had one cultural standard that they used consistently to interpret and explain events, the progressive outlook of the Anglo-American world, reflecting Luce's own consistent views. Almost everything carried in the march of time either displayed that world or made invidious comparisons with it. One example was an otherwise pointless piece about Lake Tana in Ethiopia. The source of the Blue Nile, high in the mountains of the northeast of Africa. The narration boomed over shots of the landscape, fed in the rainy season by the drainage of a vast plateau, like, likes a lake seldom visited by the white man, but of vital importance to one great white nation. The importance of the lake, in short, was that it irrigated cotton fields that were important to the British textile industry.
Right. What is the source saying? Lake Tana is a source of the Blue Nile. What is the source doing? Presenting Africa as important only to the degree it serves Europe. So when you read this specific text, although you can see evidence that supports to the stand of the author, but the thing is, the author is very biased when it comes to choosing what type of information that he or she presented in order to support his or her claim. Kaya nga, the implication of this text that the source makes surprising choices about what facts to present, how to present them, and what to emphasize. So meaning, even though you presented facts in order to solidify your claims, but still it can be biased. You can choose whatever information you have in order to frame what's your motive or what's your intention towards writing a text. So it's very important that you know how to scrutinize the motive of the author. Next one, put the source in context. By reading a source with outside events in mind, the historian can extract new meanings. Please read this one, Jaber.
In the political climate of the civil rights and Black Power areas, ethnicity was necessary but not sufficient for the category of white ethnic to sustain political claims. Its members needed to draw analogies between condition and that of officially recognized mi- minorities.
Minorities.
Most notably African Americans, they would need to recover two histories. One of the group's past triumphs, a filiopiastic ethnic past to forge a common ethnic identity to supplant the board category of whiteness, and the other history of group oppression, of shared suffering that would allow them to gain political recognition on the same terms then enjoyed by blacks, as well as a widening circle of the aggrieved minorities, including Latinos, American Indians, and Asian Americans. As a young Barbara Mikulski wrote in a New York Times op-ed, "We called ourselves Americans. We were called Wop, Polak, and Hunky."
So what is the source saying? That immigrants from Central and Eastern Europe faced discrimination. And what is the source doing? Claiming that the descendants of those immigrants deserve some of the privileges being granted to African Americans, Latinos, American Indians, and Asian Americans. The implication of the text is that there's an agenda behind this information. In mass communication, that's what we call agenda setting. When you publish an article or a text, but you have a hidden agenda, meaning you have other motive or intention. It's not just you're going to present your personal bias or personal stand with regard to an issue. But the thing is, you want something to happen. You want to invoke an advocacy or something that can advance your purpose, personally or collectively. So another one is a critical writing. This is also closely related with critical thinking and critical reading. Critical writing is a product of critical thinking and reading. So before you can write anything, especially when you conduct a research, you cannot write anything if you did not equip yourself with a lot of readings. That's why it's very important in research, you need to equip yourself with review of related literature. You need to read and read and read a lot of materials in order for you to conduct a research. So it's very important in writing, you need first to read a lot of materials. In critical writing, you need to first to critically think what are the information or sources that should be included in your reading. And when you read, you need to critically analyze the information or materials in order for you to know which are factual or which are opinions, which are the motives of the author, or which are actual or real life situation. It is our judgment of an idea, action, decision, or piece of work presented in a written form. In the academic world, common forms of critical writing are reaction papers and critiques, such as a review of a performance or a piece of work, whether technical or artistic. Critics and reaction papers are two forms of critical writing that are extensively used in academe. So in academe, you will encounter a lot of writing compositions, writing materials. You have research paper, you have, it could be thesis or research article, reaction papers, critic, film reviews or book reviews, and others. Okay, critics are papers that assess or evaluate the merits of a piece of work. Critic, according to Swales and Fick, 2012, is French for critical assessment, which can mean a positive or negative judgment on work or a combination of both. Thus, a critic judges an assigned subject objectively, using criteria. Common examples of critics are film and book reviews. So when you say critic, you're going to evaluate the positive and negative contents or elements or characteristics of a material. It could be a film, it could be a book, it could be an art, or any form that can be subjected to criticism. And in critic papers, see, critics, it should be in objective manner, meaning you need to use criteria. You need to have a basis. It's not just you're going to provide your own opinion. Meron kayong basehan kung bakit, why you come up with this kind of critic, with this kind of criticism, because you have a criteria. You can use theories. In research, we call that conceptual and theoretical framework. Or we have what we call variables and indicators in research. So you need these factors in order for you to criticize the information or the data that you have gathered. It's not just you're going to provide your opinion, but you need to have a basis in order to formulate a rational judgment. Reaction papers, on the other hand, are papers that present a writer's evaluation of the work, as well as his or her experience and feelings in relation to on the work being evaluated. Thus, reaction paper is like the critic but is more subjective as it allows the student to talk about how a particular work affected him or her. So reaction papers, it's all about your opinion. That's why it's subjective. You can criticize or evaluate whatever you want, however you want, as long as it reflects to your emotions, what kind of emotions being invoked to you by the subject of your criticism. So reaction paper, it's subjective. It's fine if you don't have a basis for your criticism. It's different from critics kasi objective siya, meaning you have a criteria. In reaction papers, it's fine if you don't have a criteria. Wala siyang criteria, subjective siya. And that's it. So do you have questions? Clarifications? By the way, yung critic at saka reaction paper will be discussed on the following meetings. We have separate discussions about this one. Critic is your performance task for this first quarter in EAPP. But we will discuss this further so that you will know how to frame your critic. Yung film critic yung sa Parasite na film. Okay, do you have questions? Clarifications? Wala? By the way, we'll remind you sa may mga kulang sa EAPP. I already updated you guys pero yung mga nag-submit kagabi at saka kanina, hindi ko pa na-check. We'll give you an update later. Okay, I will still accept those who have still lackings, but please do it before you submit your week 2 assessment activities, para dili magtapok inyong pang-submit. So, do you have questions, clarifications? Wala. Still 2:15, we have 15 minutes. Sige, bigay ko na lang to sa inyo. And that concludes our discussion for this meeting. And thank you very much for joining our virtual meeting. Have a nice weekend. See you next week. Bye, guys.